Hi, this is Brasscheck, and we're recording this on July 10th, 2024. This is an interview that we'll be showing you conducted by Jordan Peterson uh, with a young surgeon, somebody very early on in the process of becoming a surgeon. And he talks about the things that appear in our book, What the Nurses Saw, which, by the way, we're coming up on our year anniversary. And of course, many of the things that we talked about in the book, obviously books take a while to produce. We've been talking about 4 years. Um, so Jordan Peterson's finally catching up. He found a really good person to interview, and I want to go to that right now using my newfound technical prowess. Let's see how it goes, and I think it's good. Here we go. Nope.
And during that time, there was vigorous debate about issues in medicine and surgery. We would have these meetings every week where we would discuss these topics, and we would discuss them freely. We would have these different points of view that were fleshed out, in really rigorous ways. But in 2020, all that changed. And this was, again, the time where I was at the bottom of the totem pole, right? It was like my second year in training. And it was in March of 2020 that everything had changed, where the medical profession and really our society's institutions had been transformed, I think, in two ways, where they had, instead of pursuing medicine based on morality and evidence and science, it was based on ideology. And what I mean by that is this belief that truth is subjective, that it's not reflective of the objective world, right? So that something is true if you say it's true, not because you can observe it or record it or measure it. All you have to do is just say it's true. And this is a problem when you see it in like a college classroom, but it's a totally different thing when it's guiding the interventions that you're recommending for patients. And that's what happened during COVID with the masks, the lockdowns, the social distancing. None of this was ever based on any type of scientific thought. It was simply because someone said it and everyone believed in it. But the second component that changed was censorship. The ideology had taken hold, but no one was able to question it. No one was able to debate it because of the censorship. It happened in the media, it happened in the news, but in academic medical centers, I can attest that this is where the effect was most powerful, where if you questioned anything, you would have the most severe repercussions to your job, to your future, to your opportunities, everything. So a lot of people saw that in like this very kind of bird's eye level. But I was in the hospital. We would see bad cases of abuse before, but the abuse we saw afterwards was the most shocking thing I've ever seen. So it's like during that time that I became very familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead. That's a horrifying thing. So that was my first few years of training.
Let me summarize that.
Okay, I don't really want to hear him summarize that because his summary is not very intelligent. Let me see if I can scroll through here. So this young doctor in the summer of 2024 is doing a good job of explaining what took place starting in 2020, something we were reporting as early as, I think, May 2020, talking with nurses. And of course, our book came out it's coming up on its first year anniversary. So he is going to talk about, well, you'll hear what he's going to talk about. It's pretty important.
And the reason is because we would see these people every single day. The ones who would have to make the phone calls to the families was us. The people who would stay after and talk to the patients was us. The breakdowns these people would have were experienced by us. We would see all the worst parts of it. And so, yeah, that I believe laid the groundwork, because when you have the entire medical establishment, every doctor who participates in this, right? They like adopt this sin, right? This shame, because everyone knows it's wrong, but everyone's doing it. And it's kind of like you prepare them for what's next, because if they don't speak out on that, then they're not going to speak out on anything else. And the only way this becomes as universal, as institutional as it has now is if doctors don't say anything. Because what these people...
And I want to point out, guys, what he's talking about now is that not only, as documented by our book, what the nurses saw, did they kill seemingly, it appears to be hundreds of thousands of people that should have lived. They also accelerated dramatically their agenda of what I've been calling for years now, the chemical and sexual mutilation of children. So they used COVID as a cover to radically accelerate that program. And at the point that he's making here, and it's well taken, is once you throw rationality out the window, anything becomes possible. And we were saying this back in the spring of 2020 when all this was starting. And one of the things that became possible was a dramatic entrenchment of the assembly line to put troubled, confused young people on an assembly line to be mutilated. I mean, that's what it is. That's what they do. That's what it is. So let's go back to our doctor and get his firsthand information.
People are proposing has zero therapeutic rationale. And that goes before evidence. That's upstream from evidence. Like if I take out an appendix, right? I take out someone's gallbladder or a colon mass because I think it's a tumor. I have to have a logic, a rationale. I have to be able to identify a problem, make sure that the risks, that the benefits outweigh the risks, because whatever intervention we're applying, you have to do that calculus.
It's an interesting hypothesis. You see, I hadn't considered the fact that acceptance of the lockdown lies, especially on the medical side, and the emergence of that cancel culture around any criticism, set the stage for the next sequence of lies.
See, this is where I got a problem with Jordan Peterson. I mean, really? You're just figuring this out now? You're just figuring out that once rationality is thrown out of the window in medical settings, that anything becomes possible? Okay, better late than never. But you're really late to the party, buddy. Anyway, let's hear what he has to say next.
I mean, there's other causal reasons, I presume. I mean, I read a PDF a while back that was prepared by a marketing agency that described the growth opportunities on the transgender treatment front, the so-called gender affirming side of medicine, which that gender affirming phrase, that's like one of the most manipulative lies I've ever heard in my life. It goes along with the...
Okay, we get it, Jordan. It's a manipulative phrase. How about not using it? How about coming up with a better one? I mean, if, there's a lot of words that we're not allowed to use and we probably shouldn't use because they're very insulting and they're very degrading to other people. So you don't use them. You use something else. And yet throughout this entire interview, he continues to refer to these operations as gender affirming because somehow his intellect is not of sufficient size to just use the English language. These are chemical and surgical chemical and surgical mutilations of children using fraud and coercion in order to achieve these ends. And once we start using the correct language and stop using their language of gender affirming, which he's doing in this interview, it boggles my mind. Then we'll start making some progress on this. I mean, he's got a good big platform. He's got this guy on. Like so many of these $1 million podcasters, I think he's sort of more in the entertainment realm lately and getting worse, and it seems to be impacting his intellect. But anyway, let's hear what he has to say.
Legislation to forbid so-called conversion therapy, which I as a therapist know that nobody has been doing for like 70 years. That was a complete bloody lie right from the beginning. And so your claim is part of the reason that spread so quickly was because there was a culture of compliance and silence that had already established itself firmly in the medical community. I've never seen the medical and psychiatric community do anything worse in my entire life than what's been happening with so-called gender affirming care. And so what other reasons do you?
And again, I just wish he has a vocabulary. I wish he'd use it because, you know, he's got the platform. And if he were to start calling this what it is, other people would. And once this thing is called what it is, we are a long way to shutting it down.
Know that made this occur?
So, and just one more thing about what you say for the language.
Yeah.
It's anti-language, right? It's not just a euphemism. It's not just a few It's not a few degrees off from the truth. It's not oriented towards the truth. It's oriented towards the exact opposite.
Completely. It's diametrically opposed to reality and to the truth. You bet. It's really something to see. And like, as you are implying, most lies are just slightly off kilter, right? And that's how people get away with them. But there are specific forms of lies that are diametrically opposed to the truth. And they're obviously insanely pernicious. And that's exactly the situation with so-called gender affirming care. Okay, so what did you start seeing? You talked about the kids that you'd seen who'd been damaged by the COVID lockdowns and the increase in abuse, but that's a separate issue apart from the establishment of the culture that we're describing.
Yeah, so it was around 2021, 2022. Everything with COVID is happening, and I'm a part of it, right? So there's a part where I've adopted this shame. I know this is wrong. I know these people are being harmed. I know that what medicine is doing is wrong, and people are losing things that can never be taken back, and that I'm a part of that because I was playing a role in it. I mean, I tried to fight back everywhere I could, but you know, in my inside, I knew that there was a sense of shame, right, within me. But then it was during that time that the transgender issue proliferated, right? It became nationwide, worldwide. And you think that these things are
Okay, so he's kind of referencing two things. He is referencing, I believe, all the killing that took place in the hospitals, all the unnecessary deaths, they're not beyond unnecessary. They were murders. I mean, I don't know. If you continuously apply a therapy that you see does not work over and over and over and over again, if you throw out all the laws of previous experience with medicine, if you throw out all the laws of science and common sense, and you see people dying in front of you over and over and over as a result of you doing that, you're murdering people, right? So he kind of covers that a little bit. Interestingly enough, I don't even think Peterson, you know, for all his seeking of clicks, understands the explosive nature of the fact that they were killing hundreds of thousands of people in the hospitals under the cover of COVID using the so-called COVID protocols. He doesn't get it. I don't know where he's been, but he like everyone else at the multi-million-dollar podcast level is just oblivious. But he is onto this chemical and surgical mutilation agenda, which greatly accelerated during COVID. And now our young surgeon, whose name is Ethan Heim, obviously a good guy. I mean, this is tragic. We have all these young people who have, authentic aspirations to help people, and they go through incredible rigors. I mean, this medical school thing's no joke. In order to qualify to be in the arena and help, and they find themselves, you know, kind of in the equivalent of a Nazi concentration camp. And what do they do? So here's what Dr. Heim had to say.
Are happening in Washington State, Oregon, New York, California, but you don't think it's happening in Texas. So the story starts in March of 2022, where I was still a resident. The hospital, Texas Children's Hospital, had issued a public statement unequivocally saying they were going to shut down their transgender clinic because of potential criminal liability. And that last part is important because they acknowledge that issue, potential criminal liability. The reason they released that statement in March of 2022 is because a few weeks before, the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, had issued an opinion saying that these interventions could be investigated as child abuse, which they are. So it makes sense why the hospital would release that statement, right? They need to protect themselves, avoid this criminal liability. So they say, we're shutting down the program. And I knew that that was a lie, unequivocally. The reason I knew that is because I worked there. I did surgery there. The people who were doing these procedures had told me they were doing these procedures. So over the next couple of months, people I worked with had told me that, man, I just implanted some puberty blocking device in some 11, 12, 13-year-old kid who believes they're transgender. And I thought, man, that's odd. They released this statement a few weeks before, a few months before. So I thought maybe maybe like a few holdover cases. Maybe they were scheduled beforehand. I didn't believe it. It just seemed so absurd that the hospital would be lying about something like this. I just didn't think it was possible, right? So over the next couple of months, it just gets worse and worse, more and more frequent, where it's becoming more frequent, but also the stories are getting crazier, where you have these kids with tons of psychiatric issues. All of those are being ignored, and they're just getting these drugs, whether blockers, hormones, to affirm their gender. But I still didn't believe it, right? It took me months. But then it was January of 2023 that all doubt was gone, because it was during that time that the directors of the program, the transgender program, the one that supposedly did not exist, were given the opportunity to speak at the hospital's most prestigious lecture series. It's called Grand Rounds. This is a lecture that's given every single week. It's like demonstrates the priorities of the hospital. So you have the directors of the transgender program who are talking to the entire department, talking about their algorithmic approach to the hormones and the blockers, advising general pediatricians to ask about gender identity behind the backs of their parents, talking about fertility preservation in 11, 12-year-old kids, talking about mastectomies when kids get a little bit older. And that was mind-blowing. But then even there was a few weeks after that, there was a Zoom conference with a few members of the transgender program with a group of 150 medical students, right? Like a public Zoom conference where you had one of the social workers who talked about how they actively concealed the existence of the program from governing state bodies, right? Governing medical bodies, by saying, instead of documenting consults, right, or giving documentation to parents, she would defer documentation, like just call in consults or just tell parents. The reason is to not leave a paper trail. So these people were explicitly talking about how they were hiding this program.
How did you get access to that Zoom call?
Because they were public.
Okay. God bless God bless Jordan Peterson. But he's dense. He's dense. So, hospitals are under the best of circumstances an alternate reality. Any place of employment is an alternate reality. When you go to a restaurant, what's going on in the kitchen is a whole lot different than what's going on the floor, and that's just the nature of reality, right? But the stakes are extremely high in hospitals, and not that they were ever perfect, but their standards have collapsed. And they've collapsed in the direction of irrationality and criminality. We've documented this collapse. It's been going on for at least 40 years. I mean, much longer than that, really. But it started to really accelerate 40 years ago. It's in our book, Fauci's First Fraud. The foundation, let's see, what did I call it? The foundation of medical totalitarianism in America. And then, of course, this book, which came out almost a year ago, where we document everything this doctor's talking about, except across multiple hospitals and multiple countries. And we focused primarily on the murders that were taking place in the hospitals, where perfectly healthy people with minor respiratory ailments would test positive for COVID. They'd be put on the COVID protocol assembly line, and they'd leave in a body bag. There are a lot of people out there presenting this very aggressively as if it's an occasional one-off tragedy. And they're getting a lot of attention. And they're very good at getting attention. But the reality is this happened systematically to hundreds of thousands of people. And strangely, we're still not getting any traction on it among the million-dollar podcasters. But what this interview did accomplish, and you've gotten the meat of it right now. And you know, credit where credit due with Jordan Peterson. He found the guy, he's putting it out, he's got a platform, but he just doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it, how corrupt these institutions are. And so how did this doctor discover the existence of this massive fraud? Well, behind the walls of the hospital, it was wide open. So wide open, they felt comfortable to have a big Zoom meeting with 150 people. So they're making a public statement that they're stopping these surgeries. This is, by the way, the hospital he's talking about is the biggest children's hospital in America. This is not some obscure place that's doing a few cases. This is a factory. And by the way, not every state has these factories. So if you are in the pipeline in Iowa or Idaho or Arkansas or someplace that does not have these kind of surgical factories where they're mutilating children, the marketing team of that hospital has developed a nice pipeline, and that pipeline sends the kids to this hospital for these treatments. For these mutilations. And then, and we talk about this in our book, What the Nurses Saw, and it's on our website, and we have it in the interviews. The kids are then sent back home with horrific long-term medical problems that the local doctors have no idea how to deal with. All right. And here's the thing you have to know about surgeons. There are a lot of good surgeons out there, and but they are done after they sew you up. They're finished with you. What happens to you after that, they're not, I'm not going to say they're not interested, but it's not their business. It becomes the business of your so-called family medical provider or your community medicine provider. And, you know, I bet almost everybody on this call knows somebody that went in for something that was supposed to be a simple matter that took months and if not years to recover from, surgical, and that they never really did recover from. This is the norm. This is how it is. The surgeons will never tell you what the post-surgery situation is going to be like for you. And if they do, if they talk about it at all, they're going to understate it. 99 times out of 100. So just so you understand, and I don't know if they got into this in the interview, I can only watch this Jordan Peterson guy so much before it's too aggravating. But I think we got the meat of this thing, and maybe they got into this other piece, I don't know. But I'll tell you right now, there is a network of hospitals, doctors, social workers, fanatics who are all making money so that when a child comes in confused, and troubled and maybe disturbed, they're told their problem is they're transgender and the solution is drugs and surgery. And when it's time for surgery, they get bundled up and sent down to this hospital in Texas, which has turned itself into one of the most diabolical medical institutions since the Nazis were running human experiments on people. This is that level, guys. This is that level. We are there. This is why I've been writing these books and doing these shows. This is why I published the Nuremberg Code, I think 3 years ago. We are there. It's not a matter of we might be there, we might get there. For a certain segment of our population, it's Fauci's fraud all over again, right? They targeted the most vulnerable people first. right? As soon as they convinced male homosexuals that they were at risk, they jammed them up with AZT. And then they said, well, let's see who else we can con into this. And nobody else was buying it. So they went over to Africa and forced it on women there, pregnant women and their children. Then they came back to the US and created programs, humanitarian programs, to do the same thing to poor women in America. It's all in our film, Fauci's First Fraud. So it's already here. It's been here for decades. It's just that limited pockets of the population have been suffering from it. Now, during COVID, mass disaster. You would have thought that would have woken people up, but they're on to the next thing. But what this interview did, and it's very important because it documents the history, it documents what we knew. The hospitals collapsed scientifically, medically, morally, ethically, legally with the COVID con. And under cover of the COVID con, not only did they murder hundreds of thousands of people, they also expanded and accelerated their program to make money by chemically and surgically mutilating troubled children. I mean, this is not easy stuff to talk about, but this is what's going on. We're there. We're here. We're in the Hitlerzeit. We're in the Nazi time for certain people. And apparently they're just rolling along. They don't seem to feel they're going to be challenged on this. They don't seem to think there's going to be any problem on it. Obama's the guy that got this stuff going. Trump was asleep at the wheel on it, and Biden has helped accelerate it and is one of the cheerleaders for it. I don't know who the next president will be. Hard to imagine that the nation's going to vote for Biden. So it could be Trump. Is he going to come out and do anything about it? I don't know. He's good at talking. But this is something that needs to absolutely be exposed and shut down. So good for Jordan Peterson. And if he needs any clues on how to help combat this, stop using the evildoers' language. Don't call this gender affirming. What are you, joking? Are you kidding me? You don't call, I can't use the words that we're not supposed to use, but we don't use the words of the other side. We use descriptive terms. So I say this a lot. I've been saying it for years. This is the chemical and surgical mutilation of children. And it hurts. It physically hurts to even use those words, but we've got to use them. And that's how we have to describe this. And it would help if people like Jordan Peterson would use their intellects and platforms to start promoting. Yeah, it's fine. The other side's distorting language. I get it. You know what? Let's use the right language and let's call a spade and describe these things for what they are. And if you've got millions of views per video that Peterson has, it will spread. It will get on the lips of other people, and it will be much harder for these criminals to do what they are doing to these children. I mean, this is just horrific. This is as bad as the Nazi experimentations that took place during World War II. And it's the same mentality. It's the same setup. It's ideologically based. We've been talking at Brasscheck for years. We're the only ones that have talked about it. No one seems to be interested in the history. The Holocaust started with the murder of handicapped infants, and then that went to handicapped children, and then handicapped older adults, and then handicapped people in general, and then people with just general problems, and then they went full scale. It was doctors and nurses that started the Holocaust under the guidance of the government, and they were essential players right through to the end. It was the medical profession that did this, and they are back at it because this is what happens when you combine the government with medicine and censorship and authoritarianism. This is an inevitability. You can count on it. It's like the sun coming up in the morning. This is what is going to happen, and it is what is happening. So we'd be nice if Jordan Peterson and so many of these other $1 million podcasters would get a little more astute and start addressing this thing directly, not with sensational one-off interviews, but getting into it. As you know, we've done our best with this book No, there is no other book like it so far. I wish other people would pile on and start writing on it. By the way, hint, journalists looking for a buck, we're making money on this one. People are interested. People want to know. And by the way, there are hundreds of thousands of people that know this is true because they experienced it. And there's a lot of nurses. There's millions of people with nursing licenses, and a percentage of them care, and they want to know too. So I get exasperated with this sort of piecemeal, fragmentary, one-off. Ooh, I didn't know that. Gee whizzism of these $1 million podcasters, because this has been in our face so obviously since March of 2020. And if you do any history at all and go back in the decades, you'll see that they've been doing this to various segments of the population for over 40 years. And I'm just hoping these guys will wake up. So anyway, you're awake to the situation. Maybe somehow our voices will reach the people with the platforms, and this will become an ongoing, serious discussion. Anyway, this has been Brasscheck. Thanks for listening. To all our supporters, you are the reason these videos exist. I'm putting so much time into these things now that I do have to get some compensation for it, because I can't do this and earn money at the same time. And of course, this does cost money, but believe me, it's money well spent. I have no problem with it. And to everybody that's supporting, you know, you're doing your bit. You're absolutely doing your bit. If you've been watching for a long time and not supporting, hey, you know, you might want to think about it. If you're brand new, go to our website, get a cold drink. You're going to be there a long time. We have thousands of hours on all these topics, hundreds of hours on COVID and the medical corruption. And we started in February of 2020. And we never stopped. And there's still revelations that we revealed very early on in this that still aren't common knowledge. So anyway, to everyone who's supporting, thank you so much.
Brasscheck TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.